to chair this remote. So let me know if you have a quorum in there.
We do. We have Hannah, Steve, Mickey, and Megan.
Okay. Do we want to wait for a few more? Are we expecting a full house?
I think you can go ahead and get going. It's 7:02. We do have a quorum. A car did just pull in.
Okay.
If we don't have 7 tonight, then Mickey will be able to vote on any items or motions tonight.
Great. All right. Well, I'll call to order and then any public comments. I don't see anyone online. Do you want to move on to minutes?
Howdy.
In the minutes were an email link.
Yeah. My level of sophistication, file sharing.
I didn't have any further edits. I read it through.
The part where Chapin brought up the tip, I'm wondering if it would be worth, it's like, Chapin brought up the tip and then Matt said it could be worth exploring. I wonder if it'd be worth adding the additional context, like Chapin brought up the tip in the context of the Trader Lane development and the community, potential community center as projects that might be worth considering this for, so that their value wouldn't be grandfathered in, or, something like that. But I don't know the level of detail that, but it seems like that might be context, but other than that, it looked good to me.
All right.
Yeah, tip could be a big potential trigger point. So more context could be helpful. Chapin, I don't know if you could see that he edited or not at any point. He's usually pretty good at.
Just came in, yeah.
Oh, okay, right on. I wanted to make sure a lot of folks had some really good ideas for, just as we were brainstorming about the town plan, and I want all your ideas to have been captured. So if you don't see anything that was shouted out, let's go ahead and add that too.
I made a few edits and I see that they're in there, but I didn't see change tracking as I was doing them. Were they identified or? They were just clarifications.
Can I just ask, Matt, is since I wasn't able to be here at the last meeting, is the sort of debrief materials, are those available somewhere? Or could you send me whatever notes you were going from?
I don't know that I was going.
Oh, okay.
It might have been that document that Melinda made.
Like summary or that, like a compilation of greatest hits, whatever.
Melinda had, yes, I can share that with you. She had written, she'd emailed around like this really brief, really quick. Common themes, like we were just listing like the things from the post-it notes, basically, that we had added to the subject sheets, and it was so rough, she was kind of embarrassed that I was sharing it.
Oh,
so.
okay. Well, I don't want to embarrass her further, but I was just wondering if, I mean, I'm assuming there will be something more polished at some point.
I mean, you know, North Star is gonna write a whole
Okay,
engagement
well, right,
report.
yeah.
um,
I guess I
that-
was
that
looking
we'll
for
have,
something,
so.
you know, somewhere between very rough and embarrassing and the final
Yeah.
product, so I
Okay.
don't know.
We might polish what Melinda did a little bit,
Okay.
and send that back around at some point.
But I think in person and online, we had 118 participants.
Great.
And I'm not sure where the survey responses are at. That's sort of the push right now. We're gonna keep that open through January,
Oh,
so
good.
keep pushing the survey. I think we're still low on the count. I wanna say it was around 50 or so. Last we checked it.
We did a lot of the debrief too, in the, you know, all of us have been.
Sure, right.
Table heading and, so our comments are in.
Okay, yeah, no, I skimmed through them. I just wondered if there was like a document that I was missing.
I'll move, we accept the minutes as amended.
Seconded?
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
I'm gonna abstain because I wasn't there.
yep, sorry, abstentions, thank you.
So 6 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstained.
You get to vote.
Yeah. And I do want to note that, a member of the public joined in, Karen, so if you guys might want to do public comment again.
We can circle back.
Thank you. I'm just here to observe. I'm the alternate now for Williston on the County Planning Commission. So I just wanted to get familiar with what you guys are doing and just see the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Welcome.
Okay, want to move on to the zoning bylaw revisions, the Act 47.
Sure. So I'll just start by talking about this a little bit, and then might make sense to screen share the ACCD link at some point, but most of you are probably aware that state law changed a little bit, starting July 1st, coming out of the last legislative session, in regards to how towns can regulate certain things under zoning. And these changes were made with the intent of increasing the supply of homes in the state. And generally, they're what we would refer to as preemptions. You know, you can have zoning, but you can't prohibit the following things. The biggest preemption that exists in Vermont is that agricultural practices are not subject to zoning at all. So this is like a much more dialed back version of that around some particular things related to trying to have communities produce more homes. So what the law says is that municipalities must update their zoning bylaws in accordance with these new preemptions. And this law was passed at the very end of June. And most of those preemptions became effective on July 1st. There has been no time to actually have an amendment process around them, and that's okay. You know, we often look to our neighbor South Burlington. They haven't done it yet either. Some of our other neighboring municipalities are working on it. But what I wanted to do a little bit tonight was talk about the highlights of that, answer any questions folks have. I would anticipate amending the Williston bylaw along with the adoption of the new village development standards at the same time, and a couple of other cleanup items, that I'll try to touch on tonight. But amending the bylaw to meet those standards. So the big preemptions are around home type, and density. And then subheading, some things about parking requirements and building height. So those are the big ones I'm gonna focus on tonight. The main idea is that, and I actually thought this was codified before, but anywhere that residential uses are allowed, you need to allow duplexes. And you need to allow them with the same dimensional standards as a single family home. So if you can have a single family home, you can have a duplex, the setbacks are the same. The minimum lot size is the same.
And the density is the same.
The density is still your density. If you need 2 acres for 2 houses, you need 2 acres for a duplex.
So I mean, it doesn't, you don't increase that's what I mean, it doesn't change.
It does not change the density, and that's in that ACCD guidance. They did a good job illustrating that. We can
Yeah,
talk
they have
about that.
pictures.
So anywhere you allow a single family home, you need to allow duplex. You can't impose special setbacks on it or other restrictions. But if you do require a certain amount of land for every dwelling, you still get to require that amount of land. If you have an area in town where you provide water and sewer, which obviously Williston does, it's the same idea, but you have to allow at least a fourplex. So, any lot that you can put a single family home on, you have to be able to put a fourplex on. Now, we allow a relatively small lot, for example, in our residential zoning district. You still have to fit the fourplex and whatever driveway and parking and side and rear yard and front yard setbacks and all of those other things still have to be in place. Same dimensional standard. And again, the density does not change. If you need, more acres for the fourplex than for a single, then you need those more acres somewhere in the development in the project or what have you, but the dwelling type is allowed. So how does all of that dwelling type stuff affect Williston? Almost not at all. We allow fourplex as a residential type everywhere that we provide water and sewer. We allow duplexes everywhere that we allow single family homes. Duplexes have been allowed in the ag rural zoning district the whole time I've been here. The next preemption is related to density. And it only applies to areas that are served by water and sewer, municipalities that have areas served by water and sewer, with a very few exceptions, must allow a density of 5 dwellings per acre in those areas. So we kind of sort of do that now, but not without some caveats. And this is where it gets a little bit hairier when you start thinking about today, we have this bylaw, we know it's preempted by this state law density preemption, but how? What's a dwelling? How is density calculated? Am I still allowed to remove constrained lands like wetlands from the base lot area before I calculate the acreage for density? The law is silent on all of this. What about the dwelling unit equivalent that we use right now in the bylaw to calculate density? One applicant said, well, I want, 5 homes per acre on this piece of land that I'm proposing it on, and it would require some of this preemption. One of my answers was, well, as long as enough of them are 1 bedrooms, you can do that today. But is that what the legislature wanted when they passed? It was probably not. That probably wasn't their intent. So we will, because of some of the pending Glazer project concepts that are in front of the DRB, we're going to actually seek some advice from legal counsel around that. There's no case law on this because it's all new. But we did some, in preparing for those questions, we did some things like look for other places in the law where the state defines a dwelling. Do they ever talk about size? No. Other places where density is talked about? No, not really. So there are some things that are just not well addressed by the law. And so when we move into the mode of saying, well, how much do we need to change our zoning bylaw? So today in the residential zoning district, we do allow 5 units per acre for projects with 30% affordable units as a bonus, but now we're supposed to just allow it. I think if you said, well, we already took care of that, you just have to do this. I don't know that would probably
And then there's
fly.
the village.
And then there's the village where we only allow 2, so we're super preempted in the village, and we know that. And it's all the more good reason to adopt design standards that ensure a built form and a site development that, you know, the community wants, which is what all that work has sort of led us to already. So that's density. A very cautious interpretation would be that you took the RZD and you just said, you get 5 units per acre here. I think the methodology of removing wetlands and wetland buffers and steep slopes before you toed up the acres is gonna be okay. I think we're gonna get the advice that it's still okay for municipalities to use a reasonable methodology to calculate density. Many municipalities in Vermont and elsewhere do that. Funny enough, they didn't do that in Montana. And one of the projects I looked at once was a 640 acre, you know, section, the old township and range with a big lake in the middle of it. And I went to my boss and I said, well, what's the area of this? He said, 640 acres. I said, oh. So lots of little camps around the lake, you know, so depends on where you are. This stuff can be different. But a cautious way to do it would be to say, all right, a home's a home and we need to allow 5 of them per acre in the RCD, and that's just the way it is. And we can have our growth management system, we can have our inclusionary zoning requirements, but we shouldn't tie those to density. We should just keep it simple. You get 5. Another thing for commission members to think about is that definition of a dwelling and how we use that dwelling unit equivalent. And would this be a time to take it to something simpler and just say dwelling's a dwelling, you get 5 of them per acre, no matter their size, and use other methods possibly to encourage the diversity of unit types and the size diversity and those kinds of things. So something to think about there, remembering that this is a preemption in the RZD where in the past few years, over 3/4 of our new dwellings have been happening in Taft Corners where we're not preempted by this one because we allow lots of density. So we gotta figure out that.
I have one little question. In the RZD, you said that we currently allow 5 units an acre, if it's 30% affordable.
Yep.
And so this preemption basically gets rid of our
Incentive.
stipulation or incentive for affordable. Would this be a time to bump that up, or is there some other, like, what would be a reasonable response if we wanted to continue to incentivize
Yep.
affordable housing in the RCD?
So funny you should ask. I didn't mention this as one of the big changes, but there's also a density bonus for projects that include a certain percentage of affordable units in the state statute now. And Chapin, you're looking like you maybe read it. I think it's using the state definition of affordable housing development, and it's a 40% bonus. So you go from 5 to 7. Did I get that right?
I didn't read those details
Okay.
carefully enough. I went through the whole document, but I didn't pick that.
Memorize the whole thing too, Jacob?
So the other thing, we've talked a lot about affordability levels and percentages because of inclusionary zoning. So the state has a definition in law for affordable housing development. And it has its own percentages and thresholds. And it's either 20% of the units are affordable at 80% of the area median income if it's intended for rental. If it's intended for ownership, it's 20% of the units affordable at 120% of the area median income. Reflecting probably the scale of adjustment that happens that's different between ownership units and rental units. So there's a definition for affordable development, and that's important for me to talk about because the other provision that happened is if you are doing a project that is an affordable housing development under that state definition, you get an extra floor of height. So, we actually have a project in Williston right now, in the form-based code district that in a sort of a way is taking advantage of that provision. The 2300 St. George Road proposal, 3JT LLC, this would be in the front yard of the TD Bank, between TD Bank and Route 2A, is proposing a 6-story building. We allow 6-story buildings in the form-based code, but we require the 6th story to be a pitched roof. They are proposing a 6-story building with a flat roof, under the provision of this height bonus, because 20% of the units will be affordable, at 80% median. So off to the town lawyer I went with that question, and I said, well, it's clear to me that the extra floor provision means they could have a 7-story building and the 7th story could be a pitched roof. But can they have a 7-story building with a pitched roof without the 7th story, essentially? He said, yeah. So we're reviewing that under that preemption that, you know, that's out there. So
Doesn't help our public relations on.
No.
So it's something to think about in your amendment, whether you want to adjust the by right heights downward at all in the form-based code, such that the maximum size. Now, we also set a maximum feet above grade height of 87 feet. This 6-story building with a flat roof, even with some stuff on the roof, because there's a rooftop pergola and garden proposed, it still comes in under 85, just so you know. But hey, 59 units, a dozen of which would be affordable at 80% median. So, you know, it could be argued that the incentive is working. But that extra floor and height is out there. No guidance in the law. Well, what if we measure height in feet like we do in all the rest of Williston? We say 36 feet in height, or we have a slightly lower limit around Lake Iroquois. Probably you get 12 feet on top of that, whatever's necessary to accommodate an additional floor of development. So
It's something to think through with Village too, because that proposal is 2 stories with a 3rd attic story and a pitched roof.
yeah,
We could potentially have a 4-story or a 3-story with a pitched roof in Village. We'll have to work through that one too.
Mhm.
So for all these things, are we gonna like go line by line and change it, or we can just say this particular section refer to this particular section refer to this? How do you want to address this?
So what I'd like to do beginning tonight is hear from commission members. In a general sense, how would you like to address some of these things? I've laid out a couple of possible ideas. One is on the density stuff, go back to a sort of a dwelling and just set the densities where the state says they need to be. On the height, there's a question, BC and village district, in really anywhere. Are there any adjustments? You know, you could essentially write in that bonus story for affordable language that state law is asking for, and you could say what story that is. So you could take the top allowed story in all of the FBC today and say, that's now the bonus story if you're doing a project that meets the state's affordability definition. And basically then, you know, you might get one 6-story flat roof building in town, but everything else would fully comply. So I'm interested in hearing some feedback about that. And then based on that, we would go in as a staff and start trying to, the only way to do it is to dive into the bylaw and start editing and then bring those sections back to this group as part of this project over the next couple of months and show you what it would look like and keep a memo going of here's the changes we've made and here's why we think those are the ones to make and all of that. There are some things once you start thinking about like your definition of a dwelling or the way you measure density or whether you want to codify that state mandated 40% bonus. What's that all kind of going to look like at the end of the day? And you know, we might bring you some examples of that, or, you know, there might be more questions that come once you start looking at those edits, but we would initially take the temperature here and then just start writing up the text of what we thought those edits needed to be, so we could just go test it out.
So a question out of ignorance on my part, the concerns over height. Do those I think this is what you said, do those primarily affect the core area down around Finney Crossing and Tappan, that area for the most part?
Yes.
And the core of the core,
And the core of the
Yeah.
core, yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, the form-based code has some different height limits, with the tallest ones being in that town center or shop frontage. Generally more central, with lower maximum heights on the fringe. But you can pretty much do 3 stories anywhere. Which means under this, you could pretty much do 4 stories anywhere. And then there's places where you could go up from there. And, you know, I don't know how much of this you were paying attention to when it was all
Not
happening.
enough.
But height was really the thing that created the most distress.
And that's really the reason for my question is, does this put us / Williston leadership, define that any way you want to, in a bad light with the community? And is the community gonna perceive this as going back on a promise?
I've already heard about the tall building.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't think they'll look at it as we're going back on a promise because it's not doing that the state said you have to
Sure.
do this, but it accentuates the disagreement by
Yeah.
making what we did exaggerate.
And it may be a reason to decide, yeah, we do want to, we know we're preempted there and now we want to go and edit it. For sure.
It's a complicated issue for me because when you look at the 100-year vision instead of the 50-year vision, it may look silly 100 years from now to say we were limiting buildings to 4 stories or something. And when you gave us the exercise of looking at other town plans, and I looked at another one in some detail, and they're farther ahead than we are in density, and they're trying to find ways to get more homes into a smaller space. And they're identifying areas of town where they're gonna try to encourage higher buildings. Because as they say, we cannot keep building. They say it's a definition of sprawl to keep building houses on plots of land. And they've already conserved a third of their town, and they already are preserving agricultural things, and like the number of lots is small. And so they have to focus their town plan on how to continue to grow because there is growth pressure in less space. And so when I think of the long term, or I think of, say, an office building or a multi-use building, I am very empathetic to people that are worried about the appearance of high buildings, but I'm not so sure where I come down on it.
Right.
And how many projects we're gonna have, they're gonna have a whole floor that's affordable. You know, I need to think more about what the impact is, at least from my sake, but I do feel like it puts our decision in a bad light to have it magnified by the state's decision.
I mean, I think collectively, this group put 100 times the hours into thinking through this than collectively the legislature did adding that one line to state law. And I'm not saying people didn't think about it, you know, but what if we had a statewide height bonus for projects that include affordable homes? That could have a really big impact statewide. I'm sure that's a great idea. It's going to play out 251 different ways in 251, 53, right? I don't know, does Buell Score have a height limit?
No, but they do have a house. But
Do they have zoning? There might be a few, there's a couple that don't have something, I guess.
There's some that don't have a house.
Yeah, but you know, so all of these things are these kind of big blanket, in some people's opinion, pretty heavy-handed, you know, preemptions that speak to people's feeling that, you know, housing really is a crisis and that really something needs to be done, and that there are communities that, you know, I would argue not Williston, at least not for the last many years, that have used zoning to make themselves somewhat exclusive. and that this response was warranted at the state level, so.
Jill, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't wanna run the meeting, run away with when you're
No,
chairing this.
go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, you asked how we should handle this, and my opinion is that staff should go through and make the simple changes that are just simple changes, and should highlight the things where you have to make a decision, like
Yep.
height of buildings and how we calculate density or whatever. So that we see in advance exactly what we're looking at, and it feels like within our bylaws, we should somehow highlight the things that are stuck there because they are required by the
We can
state.
do that.
So that when we go to revise a bylaw, we are not accidentally thinking we can change something that was state
I
required.
mean, yeah, we can pretty much say, pursuant to VSA
Yeah.
24, 24 VSA 4412, whatever,
Or just use a highlighter color or something. that would make, would. and
why is this density allowed? Because it needs to be.
Yeah, so to me, it's like there's many of them will approve what you make sense to you, and then the ones, there are only 3 or 4, I think, where we might want to be having more discussion.
Mhm.
And if you want to propose options, that's fine, or if you just want to say this is something we
Sure.
should decide.
The question is, we don't have to worry about having this extra floor or whatever causing us any safety or any, well, that's not our concern, right? That will be somebody else will take care of it to make sure that they have a proper underground basement whatsoever, and then not exceeding particular height as a total building, that kind of stuff. That's
No,
not-
I mean, building code is enforced through the state for
Okay.
all public buildings. There are some things locally that our fire department gets more concerned about when buildings get, bigger or taller. They've started to provide us comments about things like making sure that radio communications will work inside of some of these buildings and testing to make sure whether, signal boosting equipment needs to be added. There may be occasions where usually doesn't happen if you go really tall because we have pretty good water pressure in town, but whether supplemental fire pumps are needed. So there are some things we think about as stuff gets taller, but the breaking point would not be between, 6 and 7 stories or 5 and 6 stories. It would be quite a bit beyond that.
If we can retain our number of feet, then our ladder truck knows what it can reach and what it can't.
Right. So, but, actual design and safety is regulated by someone other than us.
My question is more of, right, in order for them to get extra floor, they're gonna reduce the height within the floor, not to fit it in, that kind of thing shouldn't happen.
No. I think, that's the thing is I think the bargain at the end of adopting the form-based code was there will be this 87-foot limit, which allows a 5-story building with a reasonable pitched roof top story on it. And by luck of the design, the current flat roof proposal is 6 stories and it still fits under the 87 feet, even with, some mechanical on the top. But I think if we started talking about a preemption that was taking us above the 100-foot height again, 120 was the theoretical top of the steepest pitched roof on the tallest possible building. And the idea of going that far above 100 really kind of upset some people who were pretty vocal about it. And that was the compromise of the select board, so.
And I'll say again, I was not sold on pitched roofs for a number of reasons, that they limit the solar collection you can do and they limit the mechanicals you can put on the top unless it's a fake pitched roof with a hollow in the middle. So there's some practical considerations given that we want heat pumps and we don't want cluttered space around buildings. We want a walkable space. So I just feel like a lot of the mechanicals have to go on top, and a pitched roof is a little bit in conflict with that, and solar collection is a little bit in conflict with that.
Yeah, and in the case of this particular building, there's just nowhere else on the site to do the minimum private open area, other than to do it as a rooftop facility, which is, it's gonna be a heck of a view from up there. I mean, it'll actually be pretty cool. But that drives the flat roof decision here as much as anything.
That too, yeah.
So that's good direction. I think we can sort of give you a red line version of the chapters that would be impacted. And we can flag, you know, this you just gotta do, this you've got some choices about how you approach it, and here they are, and we can work through that over the next, you know, I'm kind of hoping like January, February, and then moving something off to hearing and building enough time and space in there to re-energize the village process and remind people that we're working on that as well. I don't want to jump
One thing-
yes on stuff in front of the village. I want to get them both done.
One thing that with that, it sounds like with this particular issue, highlighting what Shayla was emphasizing in the prep meeting around some of the sounds, it's around equity, right? So if we're talking about the affordable housing being that top, and then the aesthetic of a pitched roof, I feel like as we're highlighting what's needed, but also it's not competing with our equity mindedness and affordability. I don't know, just making sure that that's very clearly stated so that we know what we're sort of debating when we get there.
Yep.
I had another question, just quickly, toward the end of that FAQ that you sent out, there's a section on places that are covered by homeowners associations and existing deed restrictions and covenants, such as HOAs, are not affected by the new act. And any future HOA may not create restrictions on development that would otherwise be allowed. So a future HOA may exclude the development of duplexes as they are covered under some statute, some other statute. And I'm just like, that raises the question of like, how much of Williston would that affect? Because I know we have homeowners associations and I'm not sure if there are deed restrictions and those kinds of things. So just a flag. I don't need an answer right now, but I think that would be something we would want to see more about.
Yeah.
It might take a little bit more of a fine.
I'm just reading that answer again. A lot of Williston is covered by existing HOAs. We don't have probably a really good grip on what is allowed and prohibited in each of them. Duplexing an existing home is probably prohibited by every single one of them.
I know a lot about what's allowed and prohibited in Hines Estates.
Yeah, I've always been down a bit of a rabbit hole.
And where?
So most property or most subdivisions do the homeowners association where there's covenants and bylaws and a board. The Hines Estates subdivision from the 1990s off South Brennell Road had permit conditions, which are not our town permit conditions, are that of Mr. Hines. So people had to get approval from Mr. Hines to repaint their house or change the siding material or do a garage.
Whoa.
But now this dude has been dead for a while and these homeowners are trying to sell their house and all these like legacy issues from the subdivision are coming to light. And it's very bizarre. And we do with regular homeowners association stuff run into, you know, we can give a permit for an accessory dwelling unit or a vinyl fence, but then someone's homeowners association might have stricter regulations.
Yeah,
But we haven't really done a full audit to know like.
yeah.
I'm just wondering like how much of that would be needed in order to.
My thought partly is that our existing homeowner association properties are almost all fully built out. And so adding a duplex or something, adding a new building would be a big deal because it would be going against the original plan unit development permitting and so forth. I don't know how many are still not 100% built out, but not many.
We were talking about this, like, you know, sort of ready to build on lots in the RCD that are part of an existing subdivision. I don't know that there are really any at this point. So what this does say in this answer is that new HOAs could not prohibit the creation of accessory dwelling units, and that is a big deal. Because many of them today do, and, you know, people being able to have that right going forward is great.
Well, I guess part of this also hinges, or is relevant for, the Glazer,
Right, because that would be new.
right?
Um, you know, those covenants, once they were established, would not be able to prohibit people from having an accessory dwelling. Such as they're allowed in state law.
And I wanna say what the state's trying to do is what we're trying to do too. They're trying to
Yeah, yeah.
increase the amount of housing and the amount of affordable housing in a way that minimizes, impact on the environment. So existing sewer and water, higher densities, higher
Yep.
buildings. And it's all in line with what we're trying to do. It's just, we're not quite aligned.
And they're happening at the same time, like this whole, it was before I was a part of things, but like went through like a whole process of like receiving town input and like all this stuff to like. To like meet those same goals and then to
Right.
have these things stacked on top. It's like the state is putting these things into place for the goals that, you know, this team was already like, wait, we're doing that already. And so this group might have made different decisions had they known that,
And we can go
this additional
backtrack.
story. Yeah,
Except for something that gets approved right now, we can.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I remember even in form-based code, I wanna go watch that video again. I remember when we were talking about building height. It felt like there was interest in exploring the way the street frontages are shown on the regulating plan.
Yes,
And
Right.
maybe there might be areas where a lower building height in some zones, like if there's a specific view corridor, you want
Yeah,
your protections, like a little bit more nuance and there's such a big area to draw that regulating plan map.
yeah, so I'm trying really hard. To contain what we do in this one to something that we can get done, before the summer starts. I'm starting to accumulate some things in the form-based code that I wanna come back and look at, and, the map might be one of them. There's a lot of that town center frontage, the orange, streets on the map. And there's not a lot of the lower level, strollable and transitional neighborhoods on the edges, and some of that is just. The geography of the place and where there's already stuff versus where there's not, and what's down the bottom of a hill and what's on the top. But Emily's absolutely right. Another way to think about height is to move the designations around. And thus, that said, where that 6-story building is proposed is probably where I'd put the tallest
Yeah.
stuff. It's in the absolute middle of everything.
Right.
So that's definitely something, we could think about as well. While we're on that subject, there's 2 things on my mind about the form-based code area that, have come up sort of in conversations with people. One is, this might be the opportunity at this point, given that most of what this district overlays is kind of skeletal now, to just make this a zoning district and remove the complexity of it being an overlay on top of a zoning district. That would also kind of firm it up in the map. It's like, this is really what we need here. The other one is much more specific, which is we've had a couple inquiries about redeveloping existing sites into gas stations. And gas stations are prohibited in the Taft Corner zoning district that, lives under this thing. But remember, the form-based code has this much more generalized use table that would understand a gas station is just like another kind of retail. That said, anything that you drive through, if it's at all allowed, which is basically banks, but gas stations you drive through, the thing you drive through has to be completely screened from the street by buildings. So the answer when someone's inquired about like a corner lot in Taft Corners, can I knock that building down and put up a gas station? The answer's been technically maybe, but functionally no, because you'll never build, remember, building height's minimum 3 stories. You're not gonna build a 3-story building that wraps this corner,
Look
just.
down into our courtyard and you see our gas
You'll see our,
station.
well, put a private open area on top of
Right.
the pump island.
but what they've done is exit 15. On the west side of exit
Yeah.
15 with that gas station and a multi-story building that's closer to the street. Is in this direction.
And that is an FBC project. I actually asked the city planner about that one. I said, how did you navigate that? And he said, well, I let them occupy a lot more of the required building line with street wall. In other words, the building, if you think of this is the Winooski exit, the building
Good.
is, yeah, there you go. So two-story building, kind of, sort of, two stories.
Well, it's being built, it looks nicer than that now.
It's a much nicer building than what was there. And then what you don't see, but all along that frontage where the chain link fence is like a masonry street wall.
It's probably the concrete for it.
Yeah.
And the other thing Eric told me, Eric, the planner, Winooski told me is, there's a bunch of stuff that comes into play about gas stations and interstate highways and how close things can be to other things. So he said, look, it's not 100% perfectly in compliance with the form-based code. They were replacing something existing. We made up for where there wasn't building by putting in street wall. I kind of made it work. It's a lot better than it was. You know, I said, planner to planner, I completely understand this conversation. Yeah, there you go. That's what it was.
And the other thing is that gas stations are gonna be less in demand.
Yeah, but I think at this point, a clarifying statement that just says, no, make our lives easier, and save us from somebody trying to do that sort of like, you know, bizarre, redevelopment. So that was one. The other is, you know, we're all about kind of diversity of commercial uses and maker spaces and, you know, light manufacturing and things like that. And that's all great, knowing that we also do apply the bylaw where it's not preempted by or where it's not superseded by the form-based code. Some of that light manufacturing sounds okay until you start thinking about nuisance impacts, whether it's noise or odor, et cetera. And I had one that was gonna be an odor impact that I was asked about. And I said, you're really near like a bunch of apartments and like a daycare, and unless you can prove to me in a way that I'm really satisfied that this isn't gonna make everybody upset and, you know, have an impact that our bylaw says you're not supposed to have, there's just no way I would approve this. And so thinking a little bit like, it's great that use is this more generalized thing. I think the idea of like, yeah, do commercial stuff on the ground floor, do residential stuff upstairs, that's all great. But being careful about either cross-referencing to chapter 18 on potential nuisances or saying some kinds of manufacturing just aren't going, they're just fundamentally incompatible with having this mix of uses, having this density of residential. So those are, I said two things, it's really three things, but that's.
Well, there's also the non-conformity stuff.
Right, there's a 20% expansion of a non-conforming structure. It says floor area, it should probably say footprint. Because if you've got a multi-story building, 20% of your floor area is actually quite a lot of new building.
Right, and it doesn't well account for, you know, like facade refreshes or these really minor things. So for example, Allenbrook development, where Walgreens used to be, we have an application for a Dollar Tree. And they want their own dumpster enclosure. And it's gonna be between the building and the street frontage. And we didn't really have anything in our bylaw, either the previous design review standards or form-based code that said this isn't great. And we think about properties like Bed Bath and Beyond is eventually gonna be a facade refresh permit. Why not just let that one fall under the old design review where you get the materials of form-based code, but window and door patterns a little less methodical. So some of these gray areas of, it's a pre-existing site. We're making changes that aren't that 20% building addition where form-based code is triggered. But we need to apply some development standards to it and.
Right, it shouldn't just be a black hole, it should, you should go somewhere to find out what's gonna, like if Bed Bath and Beyond came in, they said, we're gonna block off half the windows and you can't touch us with the form-based code because we're not doing a 20% plus addition, that wouldn't be great. Nobody's asking to do that, but.
Right.
But they already have dead walls.
Yeah, there's many big, three dead walls. So thinking through some of those that, you know, honestly, we've spent more time talking to people about what can happen to some existing building or another, whether it was Friendlies or, what was the car stereo place, Rack Warehouse
The
building.
rec warehouse building, yep.
Sorry, not Creep Shop, Rack Warehouse, the Friendlies, the Red Barns on Zephyr Road, the Vermont Tap House building on the corner of Marshall Ave, you know. What can I do to that if I'm not gonna completely scrape it? Because if I completely scrape it, you're gonna ask me under the form-based code to build a pretty significant building and a pretty big site redevelopment. Not everybody's ready to go, do that yet. So like, the Friendlies building could be here for another good long time. It's a tough lot to redevelop. It's a weird pizza shaped thing. You wanna have some good sort of intentional standards around that, or like Emily and I looking at this thing at the dumpster, it's like, well, it's out of the 30-foot parking setback from Williston Road, because everything is super set back out there, but it's like, you're gonna be driving by, looking at a dumpster enclosure. It's functionally been the back of house for the Walgreens all along, like you're looking at the back of the building, it's that very old, parking lot oriented
Right.
development, and it's not ready to come down and be completely redeveloped, so.
And then if you build it as an addition, so if you build it right next to the back Walgreens entrance, which faces the street.
Hello? Hmm.
As much as anything, maybe even just saying, when we have an adaptive reuse or a problem like that, we direct people back to the design review chapter and process, for now. But it's an area in transition, so that was the thing I was starting to say, was just, people complained at the roundabout, somebody said, I don't like those. Stores aren't using their street fronting entrance, you're looking at the street fronting entrance of Felino's, but you're looking at the back of the kitchen, or Junior's at Cottonwood is I drove through there tonight and it just totally frustrates me. Like, why won't you guys just have a door on the street? It's just, it's gonna take some time for it to be more obvious to people that they are gonna want to do that on those developments. And I think FBC, form-based code, fixed a lot of that. But we're gonna have some of both for a good long time.
Yeah.
Yay, we got Jill back.
I'm gonna try and find. Karen Peterson.
I had a notice that she was in the waiting room before, but I don't have it now. I think when you really reactivated it, we might have lost her. I can look and see if I have her too.
Is there more that you need on this?
Not especially, I just want to give that preview and, give that little bit of direction you've all given, which is great, and just, let me know if anything comes to mind, or if there's any sore spots or sort of, afterthoughts on that, but, we want to get it done. I know it just feels like we've been amending the bylaw nonstop for an awfully long time now, but.
Form-based code, we said, first of all, we've had the bylaw amendments on the docket for a long time, but form-based code was our first shot. We expected to be making revisions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I'm taking notes on more like some of the particular architectural standards, either that we've had pushback on from applicants, or I'm not sure that meeting them is meeting the intent, or I'm not sure that they're as necessary, and that's a whole other generation of this, maybe after a couple more reviews or a couple more years even. But by and large, the experience has been that those standards are clear, that designers working under them understand what it is we're trying to do. They face some challenges trying to meet that along with meeting what their clients want, but that's to be expected. And there's enough clarity there where someone says, well, can't I just do this? And you say, no, it says right here, you can't. Okay. And, we'll see it live with the hotel at Finney going up soon. So that's
Amazing how fast that progresses once they break ground.
yeah. The company doing that does a lot of these hotel bills. They're very efficient. So the developer was projecting an opening of like April of 25. And the contractor really wants to be out of there like this time next year. Now it often takes a whole season for someone to come in and install all the sinks and the TVs and the beds and the curtains and all that stuff. So I remember this from the Hill Dome too. So April of 25 might still be a realistic opening date there, but the building should look like a building much sooner than that. Great.
Are we moving on to the comprehensive plan update?
Yeah, let's do that. So what I shared first was this progress chart that we keep sort of working through as a staff. And the things that are highlighted in the different colors here are shorthand versions of all of the implementation items from the current town plan that was originally adopted in 2016, as well as the energy plan that came later. And because this is our staff thing, there's stuff that's the responsibility of the planning department and stuff that's somebody else's responsibility. So that's part of the color coding here, but rarely are there things on here. There are a few that we've sort of said that's really not even the town, that's really the state, and we've tried to note those. But so in our world, the yellow ones are the ones that it says we're gonna do in the planning department that we haven't done at all. So the goal is, to hunt down and fix as many of those as we can, or figure out why we're not, doing them, and really, I think the main takeaway from this is, the town's actually done a very good job of achieving a lot of what the plan set out to achieve. The things that are either not done or ongoing are things that are hard, or are things that you just kind of have to keep doing. So there's some goals in there that don't really have a completion point. But there's a lot of good in there. And some of these, when we start thinking about writing our new town plan chapters, this is sort of another section of each of those chapters is, well, what's our direction? Like, what have we been getting done under this subject? And maybe what haven't we gotten done that we want to carry over to the next town plan? And maybe some of these things that we haven't gotten done, well, we really want to do something different now. We found over the last 5 or 6 years that this wasn't really what we wanted to do, and we decided to do something different. So I mostly provided this so that folks could just become familiar with it. We could talk a little bit about what we have done or not done, but also to just put this out there as one of the tools we can use in the development of the new plan, that we can kind of enumerate where we're at. And, you know, this is also, I will say, reflective of a list of things to do that was not in any way prioritized in the town plan that we're under today. It's just a list. And so I think what got done does to some degree reflect some priority that, you know, we worked our way into over the years. Sometimes it just reflects that something was easier to get done. So that's that. I don't know if anybody had any questions or comments about implementation.
I just wonder if we've been working with CCRPC about charging stations, because that showed up more than one reference to it. And I heard an interesting program on public radio yesterday or today, talking about the fact that most EVs today are owned by people with garages, and most charging happens at home. But as we meet our energy goals and by 2030, 50% of new vehicles are EVs, people without garages. And it may be the people who can't get EVs, maybe the people who don't have parking spaces. And if you're parking in a parking garage, it's probably not economical to put a charging station on every parking spot. But we need to think about it differently than we may think about it today. And so to me, there's some brainstorming that has to happen that is beyond my scope of my understanding. And I wonder if CCRPC could have good. It seems like a good thing for them to investigate for all of us towns.
Yeah, I know there's been some more regional work done about sort of what's the need going to be for charge facilities of all kinds in the next, 5, 10, 15 years. So things that we really couldn't even think about back in 2016. I know there's some RPC staff that have been working on some of that, where the towns tried to pursue its goals. It's been mostly about actually trying to get chargers built at town facilities. And you're familiar with some of that, Jake and Melinda's efforts around that and the difficulty we've had getting that done.
And if people can plug in while they're shopping or while they're at work, then it doesn't matter if they have a garage at home. It
Right.
gives a second alternative that's a little bit more equitable.
Could it be because we don't have enough incentive from states and support such activities? Because that's what I hear, but I'm not so sure whether it's the truth or it's more excuse.
I don't know, the
So
other,
let's put it this way, right? It's gonna cost, let's say, 50,000 for 5 units, right?
Mhm.
Is it having that kind of funding, or is it going to come out from your side? Right? Because I have in my office, well, we have it across the road.
Mhm.
The other state, they have it, and I asked them for the same thing, they say, no, we can do it, because over there is 100% subsidized, yes, nothing. That's what they told me.
Mhm.
I don't know how true is it. Is that true, that we don't have enough incentive to do such things?
Maybe.
There's tax incentives, but then that has to be somebody's paying income tax.
But not the public, right? That's what it is.
Oh, no, for public ones. Yeah, that is that.
That
I
is
just
what
want to
we are
say
looking for,
too,
right?
that we don't know if this might be, I believe heat pumps are a transition technology at the moment, and I'm not sure that lithium ion batteries aren't transition, and when we have a different kind of battery, or maybe a way to use hydrogen fuel effectively, there may be something that we're moving to. And so a huge investment in charging infrastructure, it's almost like we need to look at it very strategically. I'm aware of, if you were to put induction chargers in the highway at the right intervals for the speed that people are going, so you get a resonance bump up so the actual momentum of the vehicle adds to the charge. That you could charge a car in a quarter-mile stretch of highway quite significantly. And that then takes away a whole lot of charging infrastructure that's other places. And so I feel like it's a topic that's bigger than we are. And we want to plan strategically and equitably to deal with, we're gonna have many more electric cars.
I think when we, as a town, look at accessing grant funding to deploy EV chargers, like with a lot of competitive grant programs, we're not necessarily showing up as the town with the greatest need. You know, we're a relatively wealthy town, locationally, just being in Chittenden County sometimes disqualifies you from certain grant programs in the state. So we've run into that. There are grant programs that work great in designated villages and downtowns, but don't work in growth centers. And that's something that my radar is always up in the legislature for anything that talks about the designated centers to make sure it includes growth centers, because they are often just forgotten by the bill drafter. Literally, I mean, there was one in the Home Act, not related to local zoning, but related to Act 250 exemptions for what are called priority housing projects. And so, oh yeah, you know, priority housing project, it's in a designated center, and if you're in a town of more than 10,000 people, that housing project can have, there's no limit on the number of homes that can be in that priority housing project. And then it doesn't go through Act 250, and there's some other requirements, and it listed all these designated centers except for growth centers. So you can thank Senator Rom Hinsdale. I emailed her and I said, hey, I'd really like it if growth centers were named here, because we just did all this work and that's where that kind of
Point.
housing was gonna happen. And she said, okay, you know, and it went in. So, you know, but that was that. So parallel to the grant funding stuff, I do think we're often a little bit down the list. We are working right now on proposals to rework the parking lot at this town hall complex. To add some capacity, it actually helps us meet our village land use goal of not requiring lots of parking at other businesses in the village, and to integrate EV charge into that. I think we probably will be successful there. But you're talking about like this multi-year effort for 1 or 2 or 3 chargers at a time. It is really challenging to get those public ones put in.
The place that is true, you still lay conduit whenever there's a parking lot, lay conduit so that you could add chargers without having to dig up the parking lot.
Another conversation, since we're on the energy topic, I talked with Melinda a little bit today about, you know, the energy plan that was adopted into this town plan came a little bit later. I forget if it was 2019 or early 2020 adoption.
Adopted 2020, yeah.
Okay, so, because it is what's called an enhanced energy plan, which gives the town this additional ability to comment on, projects before the Public Utilities Commission. We will be working with CCRPC to update the enhanced energy plan component. There's some new mapping, there's some new numbers and things like that that need to go into this. The conversation Melinda and I had just today is, you know, we had these 2 documents that were adopted at different times. They do overlap in places. In other words, the town plan talked about energy before there was an energy plan. when we work on the chapters that touch on energy that aren't in that enhanced energy plan, we might talk a little bit about what should live where in the document or how it should reference itself. It still makes sense to have something in the town plan that is called the energy plan,
Okay.
because you want something specific for the Public Utility Commission to look at to give you that, enhanced ability to participate in.
But it could be a chapter. We talked about integrating it, but you say maybe it should still be a little bit separate.
I think it could be a chapter, but you want it to be a whole chapter that has all that stuff in it, and we can take some advice from CCRPC, but I did confirm that we won't be updating the whole town plan and leaving the energy plan alone, which was something I wanted to check in. We'll be rolling that in. I'm hoping, on another note, we had the 2016 village master plan that was adopted before this town
Yeah.
plan, that we would be able to roll the components of the village master plan that are still out there and needing to get done into the land use and community design and homes and people type chapters. And that we wouldn't need to we could refer to it saying we did it, but we could say goals for the village now are just woven throughout the broader documents. I think that's all I wanted to talk about for implementation. I don't know if folks had other questions there.
I don't know, your last item, no one assigned to it. Vibrancy in the village.
Do my best to wear something colorful when I go walking at
Yes.
lunch.
Well,
We'll get you a
Scarf.
mustard yellow coat instead of a gray coat. Oh, cool.
We're gonna have Emily in costume.
Do you have Karen Peterson asking?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Okay, it was on my, if I needed to say yes. Great.
Hi, welcome back, Carrie. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Last item, the chapter formatting discussion.
yeah. Sorry. Trying to look at too many different things at once here. So I'll leave the fun part about example comprehensive plans for the very end, and thanks for folks who sent those in. That was a lot of fun. We can keep talking about that. The main thing here was to talk about the potential plan chapter outline. And this was just something we put together pretty quickly. But it's a good jumping off point to talk about, as we get ready to start drafting this plan, we need to start thinking about how it's gonna be organized. And we don't have to have the same chapters that we had in the last plan. We need to address all of the state required elements. But some of this, I honestly don't have the answer for you yet as to exactly what these chapter titles will be or what each of them will contain. But once we do that, this was sort of a draft order of how to work through the chapter. And, begins with a vision statement, goes into history and current conditions, talks about what did our public engagement tell us about this topic, addresses the intersection of livable, resilient, equitable with the topics covered in the chapter. And then basically says, and here's the action items, and this is why we picked these, and this is why we put them in this order, and then here's the list. So that's the general idea here. And beyond sort of just what are the ingredients to each of these subject chapters to the plan, the next conversation with the commission is, how do we want to approach writing these things? So we can present sort of a division of topics next time. We'll probably do that over the next 2 weeks. And once we know that, we can actually plug in all of the data, what we think the good graphics might be, what we think the right charts are to have, what we guess the implementation items are going to be, and then work through kind of right in the middle with the planning commission or with a subset of the planning commission. So this is again, the question of members is, towns approach this different ways. We've done meetings of the whole group and gone one chapter per meeting before. We've had task forces where one or two or three planning commissioners say, I'm really interested in transportation. I'll work with staff on transportation and write it and then bring it back to the whole. I do expect whatever approach we take that we'll get a draft chapter done. And that may reveal to us, there's someone else we really want to go talk to before we put this one in the books. There's some other factor figure we really need to try to dig up, before we finalize this, or, something like that. Or there's a piece of data, we've kept track with, some intern help over the last couple of years. I have an Excel spreadsheet with every single data point that was expressed in the last town plan and what the updated number is, if we can find it, and where we got it.
Nice.
So we can pull from that to go into these draft chapters and give you that. Very intentionally, this outline is short. And I think in talking with Jill and Shayla this morning, as we prepped for this meeting, I heard strong sentiments of, this does not need to be long.
You mean the 240 pages of our current one is long?
It's pretty.
Of course, we added the energy plan to that.
Yeah,
And all that deeper history can then all be appendix. So if you want to dive deeper into certain histories or past studies, we'll have that all collated.
so there can be a lot of references, there can be a big, huge appendix. But one of the things that I think really makes a plan great, and we can move into that conversation, is when anybody can pick it up and go, I get it. I get what this community's trying to accomplish. I get where they're coming from. I get what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I love the idea of putting the stuff that no one really wants to read unless they really want to read it toward the back. I think the plan itself, it should tell a story. And I say this not because I like stories, but because for the last 20 years, this is what I've been doing with corporate organizations, is teaching them how to tell their story. And the companies that do it and do it well, people read their stuff, they pay attention. And I will volunteer right now to convey all of that to this group if anyone wants it. I just find that story-based narrative on stuff like this is the kind of stuff that causes people to go, wow, I can see that. I can see what that's gonna look like. I want to know more.
I think that's great. And I think when you talk about, the entities that do that well are successful, I do expect this plan, in the way that it lays out that big to-do list and the way it prioritizes it, to present some things that are challenging. Taft Corners form-based code was extremely challenging to the community. And, when we did the promotional posters for the engagement on that, we had these posters that said, Taft Corners will grow, Taft Corners will change, and we said will, not could or might. It was like, this is happening. We're kind of confronting you people with it, because partially because we're the staff on the front lines of that growth and change. And when people are upset about it, we start to worry that they feel like their voice wasn't heard, or like they didn't get engaged. And now the unrealistic things they expect, like that there will be no growth and change, is a failure because growth and change is happening. What we heard, I'll use the example of bicycle pedestrian paths, because we heard a lot of that at the roundtable. People really like them. They really want to see that system expanded. They want to see it really well connected. Those things take time, cost money, involve getting right of way from private, can be challenging. And they can live and die as ideas before they ever get off the ground, based on conflict. And we've seen a round of that with a bike path discussion in Williston before, where essentially a property owner said, I don't want that in front of my house. And the whole scoping study said, well, let's just do bike lanes instead on Mountain View Road. 2013. If you're going to propose things that are challenging or expensive or require a long-term commitment, I think they need to be based on a really solid foundation. And I think that's what the plan can be. So to your point about really telling the story, really engaging people, really giving people what they need to know in order to understand why this is the direction being proposed, is really important. I think when we saw the adoption of the energy plan, people were all over the spectrum about what's the size of the problem, or about what's a town like Williston's role in trying to fix things. Just all over the place. And I don't know that you could go out and build a consensus-based foundation around that right now in Williston. But I think there's other things where you can.
Yeah.
And having the plan express that momentum so that when you, 3 years after the plan adoption, you're going for that ballot initiative to vote a bond in to build a bike path, or you're going to discuss acquiring that critical link by eminent domain or something really scary or challenging like that. It's like, but we really meant it when we said we wanted to do this, and we knew it was gonna be hard, and now we're gonna go do it. And provides a lot of cover to decision makers too, if it's like, I'm doing what the town plan says, so.
The reason I tossed out the story idea isn't because I want this thing to read like a Hardy Boys novel. I'm dating myself there, wow. I'm throwing it out there because the goal of a well-told story isn't to convince people that this is a good idea. It's to tell the story in a way that causes people to be able to say, okay, I don't like it, but I understand it.
Yep.
I see why they're going this direction, and I'm free to make suggestions to change it if I want to, but at least I understand why they said things they did, why becomes the critical question.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think a good document can be really engaging around that. The goal would be that towards the beginning of the summer, we really have most of this text written. The charts can be black and white, or we can have, this ought to be a bar graph with some numbers. We might know what kind of photographs we want, but we don't need to worry about that yet. What I want to do is bring a really good text and charts version of this to the select board by the end of the summer. And have them be on board with or ask for changes to any of these chapters, have enough time to work through that with the planning commission. Beautiful, publication ready, accessible. Pick it up.
Design, not Word doc.
Not in the Word doc anymore. That's what needs to be in place for adoption prior to the end of August 2025.
Possibly with like a scrolling web-based story map version too, so you have like the traditional PDF and the web-based one.
Yep. So when you're looking at these example plans, get excited about graphics and layout and stuff, but just kind of hang on to it for another couple of months, and then we'll talk about that too.
Okay, another ignorant question on my part, is there like a date by which this has to be done?
August 25th.
That's the one you just, okay.
Yeah. So that's when the current plan expires, and I guess I should just explain that, in Vermont law, to have zoning, you have to have a plan. If your plan expires, you can't change the zoning you have. You don't lose your zoning, but you can't change it. If you don't have a plan in place,
Can't
you
apply for grants.
can't apply for grants, you can't get a confirmed planning process determination from the CCRPC. You really don't want to be in that position at all if you can help it, or for very long if you can. And that's why we're so far out ahead of this.
And it used to be 5 years, now it's 8,
8, yep.
Which is more reasonable, I think.
Interesting.
One thing I noticed by the way, reviewing our town plan, I helped write it, but I'm embarrassed I hadn't been reading it more every day. It's good. It's too long, but it's got really good direction, and the maps are so informative. But I realized in looking at that and looking at another town's town plan, that what goes in the town plan is what people feel needs to change or challenges we need to meet. So for instance, if we didn't have a police force and a fire department, our town plan would say a lot about needing to get services for safety, public safety. So the reason we get a lot of comments about paths and connectivity of paths, I think, is because we have a challenge there. It's a place that we are lacking in affordable housing. Similarly, our past plan had to do a lot with growth pressure. Our last couple plans had a lot to do with growth pressure. And so we talk about growth a lot. And I just want to acknowledge that and feel like we somehow need to make a context in the story that says we have these things in place. And so we don't need to make big plans about them. The police department makes incremental plans for meeting our needs. And we as a planning commission don't have to like plow new ground. Whereas energy we do, and growth pressure we still have to deal with. And in the list of things there that we have to consider against, I think it was equity, resilience, and some other things, we don't specifically list climate change. And you could say that's part of resilience, but it's resilience at a different level than most people think of when they think of human resilience. And when we say what are our top three, it really is what are the priorities that are hitting us. And to me, it's growth pressure combined with a desire to keep our areas of the town rural and so forth. And the climate crisis and the livability, which includes the trails and stuff. I don't know that's where we'll wind up, but to me, if we say there's three things that are like themes, I feel like all those themes should be checked. Each chapter should be checked against all of the themes, if you will.
That's great. It's really good. Yeah.
Well, that's in the, I mean, it seems like that's one of the.
Yeah,
pieces
I
in
forget
here,
what
how
my
the
words
topics
were.
discussed in this chapter align with livable, resilient, and equitable.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying is that those
Yeah,
things may be missing climate change is one of the things to
Right.
check against.
I don't think climate change is outside of resilient. I think a lot of folks are using that, like resiliency centers, things of that word. I feel like we could be specific about it because I agree with you, Chapin. I think it needs to be a priority.
Yeah,
But I
would
think
see it as
go ahead.
like part of that vision page, you would define what does resiliency mean, what does livable mean, what does equity mean? And I think climate change would fall under that resiliency.
I think it
But-
goes in all of them.
It goes in
Yeah.
all of them, yeah, but I think we can come
Sure.
up with like, what is our definition and our vision when we say resiliency, when we say livability, and it can be a couple of these things, and they'll all kind of point at each other a bit.
I mean, yeah, I think of it as like there's several categories of change that the town is gonna be experiencing. And the biggest one is probably climate, whereas in the past, the biggest one has been growth. And then I do think about livability a lot in those in terms of climate change response. And, you know, my big one is plant trees along the bike paths, so they're in the shade. Because you absolutely cook on those bike paths in summer. And plant trees like literally everywhere now. But that's just like one tiny little example, but you're right that we don't, you know, like South Burlington has this incredibly climate forward city plan draft out there now. And I think like you said about like your plan talks about the things that you see gaps in. And that's part of why South Burlington, like Williston, has done so much right. That there's that space to talk about that. And I think there's also some people within the government in South Burlington who are just extremely motivated right now to really, really push, especially some energy issues. But I think we can get there under this framework. I mean, you could even write a climate chapter and apply this outline to it if you want. And that's one of the things I said is like the chapter titles that are there now. In the current town plan don't have to be the chapter titles next time around. One framework is looking at the ones we used for public engagement that are broader, you know, homes and people, economy, et cetera, transportation, mobility. Another might be to write more chapters, but write short ones. You know,
I think
another
that's-
one. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
So that's one of those questions though with, right, if you segment out climate change as its own chapter, then are you not weaving it into its, pertinence to home. And, it's like the same thing with equity, right? You don't want to segment it and have it be its own chapter. You want to weave it in so that it's applicable to all those pieces. I think, do you want to talk a little bit, Matt, about what we were talking about in terms of ideas for when we get to the chapter piece? Are we thinking we want to work all together as a group, or have people kind of self-identify towards their strengths or interests and have subgroups? And just talking about efficiency and knowing that we have this strong deadline in August, how folks like to work, all of that, I think will matter in how fast we can do it, how efficient, how thorough.
Last time around, we had other people in the community, and I was one of them because I wasn't on the planning commission yet, who came in and worked on some of the chapters. And I think if we put a call out, there are some very interested people. Plus, we have things like the energy committee that would help write that work.
Yeah,
Housing.
yeah, so we have
Housing.
a number of committees that I expect to work these chapter drafts through. Specific chapters for specific committees, as well as a number of town departments. Some of us are gonna have to sit down with the school board at some point and talk about the education chapter. Because that's fundamentally different than it was in 2016.
Yeah.
It's not a town school anymore. So that's part of that process too. And there will probably be among myself, Emily, Melinda, and Simon, some staff leads for each of these chapters to work with those smaller groups and then bring things back in if that's what folks want to do. What I'd like to give to the planning commission 2 weeks from now would be a review of the required state elements and one or two options for how we could break this into chapters and kind of a crosswalk of how the required elements would be addressed by those. And then maybe we can talk about who's interested in what and whether the commission still is interested in kind of maybe spinning off a little bit. Somebody could say, I'm Chapin, I'm working on the energy update. I'll be working with Melinda on that and also with Megan. We're meeting a couple times coming up. Citizens who are interested, we welcome you, and then, we can provide meeting space and stuff like that. I would, as long as you're a non-quorum amount of the planning commission, you can kind of do it however you like, and the more the merrier, really.
I think we should do some of that, so it's just a practical matter.
Yeah, I think Jill expressed it really well, that what we really didn't want to do was put a chapter on the screen and edit it for punctuation as a group. Nobody wants to do, no, okay, all right, we won't do that.
We can do a final read through on our own and make track changes before we batch it over to the select board for grammatic outside of a meeting.
I like the idea that the whole group is looking at relatively well-developed
Yes.
chapters
Yes.
and then kind of saying, yep, great,
And that the story threader has done a review of the chapter first.
I'm happy to take that.
Punctuation checker has done a review of it first.
and then at the end of all of this, we will write that introductory chapter and that vision that lives over the top of all of it. And we'll write that implementation table at the very end that takes all of the prioritized items and puts them in one list. And that becomes our multicolored chart for the next 8 years, so.
Cool.
So who wants to talk about a town plan they saw that they liked? I didn't have time to assemble any of this, but the ones you guys all sent were really cool.
When did you do, Megan?
Well, I didn't realize we were supposed to actually find a town plan.
Because I did Amherst, Massachusetts.
Oh, well,
Your father was the town planner.
You would do that, so I didn't do it. I got the town planner with Amherst from about 1971 until 83 or something, 4 or something like that. Most of my childhood, basically. But I didn't do Amherst. I actually did East Aurora, New York, where I lived for 10 years. I didn't look for the town plan now. Well, my initial suggestion was Richard Scarry's Busy Town. It's like, who doesn't love Busy Town?
Busy town.
Yeah,
Wormy's the only acceptable single occupant vehicle.
yes, Wormy, right. Cause who else could fit?
That's right. He needed his own.
Right, and I almost went down and found my 50-year-old copy of that somewhere in my basement, but I didn't have time. Yeah, so I don't know what there is about East Aurora, and if you have some more viable material on Amherst, like.
I can highlight stuff about Amherst, but I don't know what other people have.
Go ahead, and I'll go ahead. You have that.
Okay, do you want to pull up the link I gave you?
Yeah, so,
Karen had to drop off, but she said, wonderful meeting. Thank you for your service all and look forward to continuing my education.
Nice.
It's great that she came.
Yes, I'm impressed.
didn't they have, like, they had like more than one applicant for alternate to the CCRPC?
Yes, they did. They had
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
people.
Good,
That's a
Great
good
to be
problem
in
to
such
have.
a
All right.
active town, a busy town.
And that's for the alternate.
You know, the story of Richard Scarry is he loved Switzerland.
Oh,
He
that makes so much
really-
sense.
He lived in Switzerland
I didn't
for a
know that.
long time. I think
Okay.
he retired there, and you'll see a lot of the buildings
Yeah.
in Busy Town are,
Oh, yeah,
you know, Swiss
Yes.
looking buildings.
that totally makes sense.
And he
now.
loved the villages, and he loved, you know, all those things that everybody loves about compact, you know, European places.
So
Yeah, they have like district sidewalk forming,
Well, that was in
right?
Holland,
I
right?
shared, yeah, that's the town plan I shared, where they've got Holland, they've got, yeah, sidewalk warming.
What's not to love?
They have some of that. in
Actually,
Whiskey,
it's
actually.
Holland, Michigan.
Yeah, in Holland, Michigan.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
Holland, yeah, the country, okay.
So, see if I can share this and navigate it all at the same time. Amherst master plan,
You know, this is every 10 years that they approve it.
okay,
And if you want to do a shortcut, I would go to Appendix A, the implementation matrix,
Okay.
because in 14 pages, it covers everything that this is like first part, this is land use, and it's going to go through each of the chapters. And whoops, if you at the top, stay at the top for a second, just the
Yeah.
first objective under land use is preferentially direct future development to existing built-up areas. Which
okay,
sounds like a familiar theme. And then all those are like the steps to achieve that. And
yeah,
if you scroll through and look for the next,
the
dark
next
thing,
gray
yeah,
one,
and it's
yeah.
highlighted, it's also bolded words.
Can you blow
Create,
it up a little bigger?
create vital downtown and village centers. And they're having multiple village centers, trying to build on multiple places.
Oh, now I've really done it, hang on.
When you just do it in the middle, there's a plus sign in the middle.
Yeah, up in the plus, right in the
Yeah,
middle,
there you go.
there we go.
Yeah. Create vital downtown and village centers, et cetera, and they want mixed use, and that they welcome, attractive and efficient. And then you'll see next is preserve key undeveloped lands. So in this 14 pages and it goes through all of the plan in terms of what the goals are and what the steps are in each section.
Mhm.
And if you want to scroll a little bit farther, just to get past land use, to see how things that are not land use look.
All right, so this is housing, I assume.
Yeah, now we're in housing. Preserve and expand number of affordable, moderately priced rental units and housing stock. And then they have specific ideas. And to me, this 114-page document gives us a whole lot of little things to check, like, oh, do we need something like this? And they're ahead of us in terms of the pressures of development and the lack of available land.
Mhm.
And that's, that, I think I should give time to the next person.
Yeah, so this is cool, and I assume when they say objective / strategy, it's like the gray ones are the objectives,
Yes.
and then what lives under it is called a strategy, and
Yes,
Williston is usually used sort of like goal, objective, policy, something, I can't remember,
action.
action. Whatever you do, you just have to do it consistently, and that's something we would, you know, you.
Maybe get rid of policy, because that confuses people with
Yeah.
select board policies.
Yeah,
Anyway, but there's a lot of resonance in what those were with things that we are considering in that specific list of actions.
I can talk for a minute about the Holland one if you,
Yeah.
I sent you the
see if we can
link.
Bring it up.
So there were a couple you're bringing up, there were a couple things that stood out to me. One was the level of public input that they received and the way that they communicated that in the town plan that they had. They were like referring back to like pictures that they had from the town, the input like sessions that they had. Second, the small thing that stood out to me was, they like specifically like talked about their tree canopy as a resource and like quantifying it on a map of like,
Cool.
this is our tree canopy coverage and like that, which I thought was amazing, love trees. But if you go to page 62, Matt, I feel like it's a good example of a broad page. There you go. Yep. So something that I think goes along with this idea of like kind of like the progressive disclosure, like start with like the big picture or like tell the story or whatever. It's like kind of having each of these categories starts with like a goal. It's like for this one, it's transportation. This is the transportation section. It's like the city of Holland will have safe, connected transportation system that serves multiple nodes. You're like, oh, okay, I see what you're going for. And then it lists potential action steps and you're like, okay, cool. And you could read more and see all the maps and yada, yada, if you care, but you could also like, you could look at each of the goal pages and be like,
You got it.
this is where you're going. Awesome. So I thought that kind of like, I thought that was a really, helpful way to frame things. It's like, this is our big picture, like this will guide everything. And then you can keep getting more granular if you care to.
I like that.
But yeah, also lots of maps. Like I thought they did that really well here.
Only to find a good
Um,
quarter-mile walk sheds around the bus stops.
yeah. Something else that wasn't in this plan, but someone at work, a coworker sent me recently was Sacramento, in their plan. They use a metric called, a FAR, floor area ratio. And I hadn't heard of that before, and it was, it was just something that was on my mind as we're talking about like density and development, and then basically it's like, and allowing certain ratios, so like basically if your building space takes up like the whole area, that, and it's 1 story, you get that, plus or half and it's 2 stories, you get that, but like, allowing different ratios essentially around closer to like different hubs, like transportation hubs.
Right.
Get a higher ratio than others, and so that was not in this plan, but stood out to me about another one.
That's cool.
Yeah, that, floor area ratio doesn't get used in Vermont as much, although it does get used, I think, in some of the Burlington code. Sorry, we actually mention it 1 time in our zoning. And it's, a preservation of affordable housing provision that I think we had to have in there. And we prevent what we call scrape offs, which is when you demolish a really small house and build a really big house there instead. And we use the floor area ratio to say you may not demolish a house and replace it with one of a floor area ratio so much greater than what was there. Because that guy called me one day, he said, well, you guys do floor area ratio. And I said, no, we don't. He said, yeah, it's right here on this page. And I said, oh, you're right. We, in this one place we do. But like floor area ratio is like, if you have a 2,000 square foot lot and a floor area ratio of 1, you're allowed to have 2,000 square feet of floor area in that building. Now, you probably need to meet some setbacks and everything, so it's probably multiple stories, and then you can have everything from, less than 1 to hundreds. Bigger cities with taller buildings use it a lot because it just basically ends up playing out into building height. But it's also a way of thinking about density without thinking about the number of homes on the piece of land and thinking more about the building, which is very much the way our form-based code went. It's the way our village code is going. So that's, I bring up Sacramento, but I don't have time to Google it, I think.
And their plan, it had so many pictures in it, it took a long time for it to load. I don't know why. The PDF was just so enormous.
Too many pictures.
Yeah.
Pictures
Well,
are, yeah, you do want to think about that.
I picked another Michigan one, where I grew up, Matt. And what I liked about that is just that it's like in progress. So it's like what we're in progress of, and how they, to me, it's how they put things online to be transparent. Is so if folks wanted to see something in review or something that was drafted, or, could see kind of the process as it's going. It's an active website, which I thought was an interesting way to go about the process. So
I'm
you can
impressed by
actually, you can see an archive plan, but you can see the current one kind of through this website that I sent. They also have heated sidewalks downtown.
What town was it, Joe?
Traverse City, Michigan.
Okay,
Great. Joe, did you say, oh yeah, you got a link in there. Hey, I'll throw it up on the screen. Neighborhood listening sessions report. Oh, cool. Okay.
Nice photo.
Yeah, they took it during that 1 month when it's not winter.
Well, we'll keep getting Larry David to get us drone footage, or not Larry David, Larry, what's his name? Larry Reed.
Very read, yeah.
Larry David won't help us, I'm sure. But Larry Reed, he can do some nice drone more photography for us.
So like here, putting up some of their, like you said, Hannah, the stuff that they were doing with community work. And I think that's, if you go up to the project update and more, there's the draft plan that you can kind of go through.
In the menu bar at the top, yeah.
Yeah, click on.
Cool. Oh,
Oh,
hang on.
Oh no.
Oh, it's,
You broke
I
the
think it
website.
opens in a new tab, so go back, yeah.
you broke it.
see if I can get one of them to open.
Oh, it looks like they were in successive order, so the oldest was at the top.
With the
Yeah,
SharePoint.
it's a SharePoint. I have to use Chrome to zoom it.
So I just spent time kind of just seeing how they were presenting it as like, to me, it's like a way to extend sort of what we were doing this fall as we're writing and iterating and thinking of graphs. And I think it's, if you go to the more, you can hit on like the draft plan. Yeah. And it shows you like where they are in progress.
This is an ArcGIS site.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Things we already
cool.
have in our subscription package.
See what this land use. Ooh, nice map. Sign again. Future land use map. I love how everybody just uses the basic Microsoft template. Same exact one I used for the outline. Hang on, I'll just zoom, I just want to zoom into like text here.
Yeah.
Talking about history. So this is describing. This is all describing what they call this commercial gateway area. So there is a point in the plan where you kind of talk your way through the various geographic parts of the town. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So another thing, Jill, that I note about this is just the very fact that they are, this does work with the back button, that they're putting drafts out there and kind of saying like,
Yeah.
this is a work in progress.
This
and
is where we
here
are
it is.
now. Right. And it's telling you, if you click on certain things, it's telling you who was there for that review team. So if they brought in outside stakeholders beyond like the group that's, so, it just tells you kind of ongoing, like there's all these people involved. This isn't just us running the show. We're listening. We've heard you. And here's, once they get to final voting, they say like, this is the draft and review and here's the vote. But, I talked about how I like that it's, once they get into things, it's very, very low text. It's like infographic, graph, bullet points.
I like something like this.
Which is also just a good tool for people in the process.
Yeah. That's a cool graphic. I like
Visual's
that.
good.
Yeah, that might be may either be like a Word template graphic or a Canva graphic.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
just
Canva's
really,
great, and you know, I mean, you don't really need Pro to.
so I like this kind of where they close out with what can be done. Um,
Right, and doing it so it's story, but also it's like a blurb and a box and a color, you know, so whatever that color is stays consistent throughout each of those chapters. So it's telling a story but using other means
Wow.
besides long text.
We have those same things are on this slide graphed in our town plan.
Median home price, $292.
yeah,
Wow.
rent's under
Let's
1,000.
import it over. Let's do the import.
I have friends who live in Shelburne who came from Michigan and they're like, do you know we could sell our house here and basically retire and own the same house? And like
Yeah.
the
Sad but true.
cost of living in Vermont is impressive.
Extreme, yeah.
Permit bump, so this is, you know, we're gonna be able to refer to our housing needs assessment for a lot of this too, but.
That looks exactly like one of our graphs from housing needs assessment.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
that's cool.
Stock Excel colors.
Well, that's really neat. I really like the transparency of this, of, you know, like, these are all, I assume what they're calling action plan is like really going to be the master plan. Let's look at resiliency. Let's just see.
Notice they list sustainability, resiliency as two different things.
Mhm.
The natural system. Yeah, we could probably do something similar with transparency, like the in progress, if we figure out who the planning commission leads are for each topic area. So if a member of the public wants to talk with you, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, go to this person.
But just checking time if other folks want to share their plans. We've got about 10 more minutes.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody had,
Steve said he's got one.
you got, what one did you have?
I went with Midland, Texas.
He says with a Texan accent.
Lived there 3 times when I was a kid. So I did live there 3 times, actually. My dad's retired petroleum geologist, and an evil thing, but anyway.
All city tour.
Midland is the heart of the sort of Permian Basin, which historically has been the oil center of the United States. And it's gone through a period of reinvention where they have now kind of redefined themselves as, you notice it down there at the bottom, it says Midland Feel the Energy. They changed that logo to be with a cross between feel, it says Be the Energy.
Be the end, yeah.
And the reason I chose them is for a couple of reasons. One was that they're facing many of exactly the same things we are at a very specific level. They're redefining themselves as a town, as petroleum has disappeared, and they've got to become a different set of industries, and they have rather well, number one. Number two, they still have a lot of oil wells there, you know, the pump jacks that go up and down, and they can't get rid of them because they supply the oil that, whether you like it or not, people need. Number three, one of the things that they have, which I find really interesting, is that there's a graphic in here, and I apologize, I don't remember where it is, but it basically lays out a kind of a graphic of what the town looks like and why it's a challenge. And it's over here, it says the village, and that's the historical part of Midland that has all of the old kind of Western buildings, and at one time, the tallest building in the United States was the Petroleum Building, and it's still there, and a lot of museums, that kind of thing. And then connecting to that, there's a transportation corridor, and at the other end of the transportation corridor is what they call their vital core, and that's their Finney Crossing, that's their Taft Corners. And what they're trying to do is, there you go, figure out how do we preserve the village, but preserve it in a way that causes it to continue to be what it is, but at the same time become vibrant. How do we turn that corridor, which right now is just transportation and it's ugly and it's dangerous and you can't walk across it, into a walkable area? And then how do we create growth over there in the core area to sort of achieve the goals of housing availability and business growth and that kind of thing? The thing that I found really intriguing was that one of the things they're doing is they're looking at within that village, there is a street that is got a lot of businesses on it, but people don't go there. I mean, people shop and then they leave. And so one of the things they've done is they've created what they call the Midland Market. And what it is, it's almost like a permanent street market. Where it kind of makes me think of the scene in Austin, if any of you've ever been to the Austin music scene. There are traditional businesses that open their doors, and then every night and every day they have, it's closed to pedestrians. It made me think a lot of our, what's the street? Church Street. Well, it's like their equivalent of Church Street, but even more vibrant than that, because there's a permanent farmer's market, there's a permanent street fair, there's permanent music, there are food trucks that come all the time, and they have reinvented that part of the town to where it now is something that people actually want to go to, as opposed to have to go to. And I just found it to be just a really, really interesting kind of comparison to what we're doing. They're facing that there's a, that's what it looks like. That's just one part of that. That's more of a parking lot, but they have an area where it looks kind of like, I don't think of a street. Well, it's kind of like Church Street, but lots of pedestrian traffic, lots of things going on the sidewalk and on the street and so on at the same time. It's just really intriguing.
South Colorado Street. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and there are pictures of it in the plan map at some point. I'm not looking for them now, but they're there.
Hang on. The trick is getting enough of Zoom out of the way.
Yeah, don't worry
To
about
also navigate the website at the same time.
I do have to turn into a pumpkin at 9.
Well, that map is really familiar.
Yeah.
I think maybe the advantage Williston has, right, is that the corridor is really basically a rural corridor.
Yeah.
In between the two.
And it's not very long. What would you say the distance is compared to, say, between
About,
here?
from the village to what they're calling the core there is probably around 4 miles.
Right, which is a lot longer than
Twice what we
we're
are.
dealing with.
Sorry, I went and looked for the word market, which may
That's
have
okay.
been
No worries.
too many market things.
It was down a ways and,
Talking about the oil and gas market.
They have a gateway corridor.
Yeah.
yeah.
This is cool. This is really nicely illustrated. I also noted a lot of these plans people used a landscape format.
Huh.
Absolutely.
Interestingly. Mickey, you sent me a link to Dresden.
Don't worry, but I can come back. It's basically, I really pretty much like, it's not as a plan, it's more like what they have managed to achieve, right? In terms of transportation, they managed to achieve some kind of those housing to the point, while I was reading it, like, they even managed to sell their house, affordable housing to people who wanted to buy it, and they used that money to pay off all the debts that the town has. So, which means it's like, if we really manage to do those things to our advantage, it is not even like, subsidies or, money losing enterprise to become actually even making money kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things that we could do if we really do it properly with all the intention, right? Because we keep on talking about round and round about we wanted to solve something, but I don't really see that we have concrete step to get there. But we're doing all the basic building block, but I don't think we have thing to say like, if I'm gonna have 100 homes or, I don't know, 500 homes a year, how are we gonna get that kind of things? Like, probably that's something.
So one thing I'll say across all the example plans is you'll see really differing levels of specificity in those goals.
Yeah.
from, goals that start with consider
Yeah.
something, which is pretty easy to do, versus the vision is that the village will be connected to Taft Corners by an off-street multi-use path by 2050. And then when you start, like you said, Mickey, talking about, well, then how do you get there? And I mean, my preference would be that the Williston plan trends more towards that kind of specificity because it gives us more of a framework to work in. And it also can really impress on your decision makers and your elected officials, oh, wow, we're really deciding a work plan for the town.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Chapin.
Later, Chip.
Good night. Take care.
Jill had chatted that she lost her sound. I don't know if it's back.
I'm back. Yeah.
So because.
All right. Well, great. Keep looking around. In terms of like graphics and simple versus complicated, a couple I like locally are Colchester and Shelburne. I'm not saying anything about what they're saying or what their policy decisions are necessarily. I found Colchester's really easy to just kind of skim through, and it's not too old. Shelburne's is getting a little older, but Shelburne did a really good job of the critical stuff up front and the big appendix in the back. South Burlington's interesting to look at, especially the draft that's currently out there. And like I said, it's really, really climate response heavy. Like Chapin said, because I think there's space for them to do that. You go too much further afield in Vermont, places start to get really small. Like you can go read the Huntington Town Plan, the Starksboro Town Plan, they're interesting.
But even some of the smaller ones like Jericho, has a pretty.
Jericho's quite
energy sort of statement,
Yeah, and Jericho's been, they didn't deal with like the big box stuff that Williston dealt with, but they had their share of the residential sprawl. And now sort of the idea of kind of wrestling some village centers and corridors out of that and some hard decisions to make about what to invest in and what not to. Heinsberg is the same way. There's been an incredible emphasis on the village, but there are areas outside of the village connected, for example, to water and sewer, but not where the town's hoping to spend most of its limited resources on those things. So going back to that density preemption, there's some language in there about, well, just because the pipes are in the ground doesn't mean you have to allow 5 per acre. If you've connected some area because of environmental mitigation, that might not mean that you have to allow a whole lot of new growth there, for example. So some nuance I didn't cover because it's a little less relevant to Williston's situation tonight. But yeah, there are places that are wrestling with like similar questions about concentrating development versus what people are willing to tolerate for design versus limited infrastructure, et cetera. So
Cool.
Definitely some around here to look at too, if people get interested, and send them on to me if you see something interesting, for sure.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
You ready to adjourn?
I
Motion?
think so.
Yes.
Good.
9:05.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Matt, Midland is the town that this TV shows Friday Night Lights is based on.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And as a kid, when I never got to high school there because we moved overseas before I got there. The 2 high schools in Midland,
Over there, so
Robert E. Lee,
bring my
Ulysses
light.
S. Grant. So there's no like rivalry in that town.
No, not at all.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Are they north and south sides of town?
Actually, they're east and west, thankfully.
Oh, good.
Well, not be good.
Here, I actually ride my.
I love Friday Night Lights, I'd love to be the Coach Taylor of that.
Great show.
It's a great show about leadership.
It's not about football.
No, it's not about football. There's a lot of sort of teenager soap opera stuff in it that I could sort of take or leave. The coach character is just.
Complex situations,
Yep.
moral situations, ethical situations, I mean, that's what it is.
You mentioned that outdoor market, so I grew up in Roanoke and had an outdoor market
That is super.
like that.
That, the one on the right there, go back one, you can, that one on the right,
Mhm.
that's what the Midland one looks like. And it's kind of permanent, and Trader Lane is what I was thinking of, that
Yeah.
it would, the way
Yeah.
you've talked to it as an organization about kind of what
Yeah.
Trader might look like. Yes.
Back in my day, this was all potholy parking lot and the rocks and fossils vendor would be right here. And then they made it, a plaza and the street was two-way and then they made it one-way.
Yeah.
So the vendors park all along there and they have the open air and then there's businesses along it.
I love
Good
it.
night, everybody.
Good night,
night.
Megan, thank
Take care,
you.
bye.
Yeah.
And then this is the city market building, which has indoor dining rooms, went through a huge renovation
Hmm.
at one point in time. Yeah, so that's what the street looks like. There's shop fronts on this side, open air market with shop fronts on that side.
Hmm.
And the main city market.
That's such an
building.
attractive use of outdoor space, and it's,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and it's useful, I mean,
Yeah,
it serves a real purpose.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I have no idea whether any of this will ever happen, but
mhm.
like when we're talking about Trader Lane with Jeff Davis, who owns all the land and, big box Vermont.
Yeah.
And Jeff's sitting there going, I really want to get this street built so that sometimes we can close part of the street that tees into it and pedestrianize it. Like his whole line of thinking about what could happen in Williston. Because this is a guy who does not need to make any more money. Like, he really
I hope not.
doesn't, he's maybe 70, winters in Florida, he's made all kinds of money. His posture at the beginning of form-based code, I think, was, I'm just sitting here waiting for the next big box that wants to come. Or the next, three things that I can fit into a box that wants to come. And if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, great, but don't do things to me in zoning that won't let that happen. And of course, we said, we're gonna do everything in zoning that won't let that happen. But Jeff, you can have 3 and 4 and 5 stories, and you can have shop fronts on the ground floor, and the meetings we have with him now, where he's like, well, what if there was like a glass arcade over the sidewalk? And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like Church Street, Jeff, but if you want to build it here,
Yeah.
okay. I mean, he's just the last person I expected him till pretty close to the end. I just expected him to sue us,
Wow.
and I think he sees that stuff as like, yeah, like this can be successful. And I think as a commercial developer, when you go, well, I can build those upstairs apartments and I can lease them before the paint's dry. And then I can afford to put tenants I really want to put, in the ground floor. I don't have to try to get that.
Yeah.
Turning revenue like right away, because that's the thing everybody talks about being hard to do. And some of the angst over South Burlington City Center as well, there's very little commercial in it. It's like, well, yeah, that's what happens when there's a whole freaking mall next door. Like it's kind of pulling all the oxygen out of the room.
What used to be a mall. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird place.
You think?
It's surreal in there. Have you been in?
No. Not
I went
a
in,
long time.
a couple of years ago. I went in, my son was little. We really, it was like when Target opened, and then it was like, oh, well, you can walk into the mall from Target, and we'd gone to see Target. And so like, there's a lot of kind of